Okay, so I thought it would be kind of really fun to make a little video on the rendering and how to render. Now, rendering is something I'm not going to be honest with you, I'm not the best at. So I was just kind of doodling today, and I thought it would be kind of fun if I just did a little video on the rendering, how to render, because it might help you. So if you don't know what rendering is basically transitioning between two values. How do we transition between these two values? Okay, this is rendering. It's basically how do we go from value A to value B, in what way? Now, I'll teach you immediately a couple things and concepts that will be very important to you. So the first one is edge. This is very important. Okay, edge is the most important concept when it comes to rendering anything. And of course, having correct values and colors, that's all very important, but edges is like the most important. This is the thing that rendering is all about. So fundamentally, edges really means, I'm gonna make these very simple swatches right here, right? So edge really means is how do we transition from one value to another? And that seems like kind of very banal, but it actually is very important. And I'll explain to you, I'll show it to you, in examples. So basically, there is three types of edges. So this would be a hard edge. A hard edge is a very abrupt transition between two values, and it kind of looks kind of pointy, right? So for example, like a box will have very hard edges, harsh transitions, because it has very abrupt changes in planes, right? It follows, right? The sharper the translation plane, the sharper the edge will be. Another place where you will find sharp edges is in, how do I put this, tight areas. For example, if you have like a very, like imagine like a very wide round object, like a very round plane, something like this, right? For example, this will have a very sharp edge here, because while it isn't like exactly 90 degrees, this kind of transition is very tight. Even though it's kind of rounded, it's still very tight, and you will have a very sharp edge on these kind of objects. So that's sharp edges. That'll be sharp edge. Another type of edge is the not the lost edge. It's the the soft edge, or the soft edge, I guess. And this is essentially when you just kind of blend these two values in on each other, and you get something like this. And this is like very round. So for example, like cylinders will have very soft edges. You know, kind of as the light is hitting it, it will kind of roll off the cylinder, and it will create kind of these like soft round edges. Now there's a third type of edge, which is lost edges, which we'll see in some examples, which is essentially when these two values are they're so blended together, it's very difficult to see and tell where one is and the other one begins. It's very like they're so intermixed that it's kind of difficult to tell you where the transition begins and ends, but you can clearly see there is a transition between these two values. Like there is a clear transition. It's just kind of difficult to tell you where it is. So let me just write these down. So we have hard edges, hard, soft, and lost. And you can basically in between these as much as you wish. So I'll just show some examples because I was just drawing on these. So for example, here we have very sharp edge. Here we have a very sharp edge, and kind of a soft edge right here that gets sharper the lower it gets. You see this? For example, here we have almost like a lost edge, like it's super wide, right? And this helps us kind of understand the topology of the object that we're painting. So for example, here we kind of get this sense of like, oh, it's this is kind of rounded, and then there's like an abrupt transition to something like this, and then like a very slow, you know, very gradual kind of value shift. Here again, it's the similar thing. Like there's a very sharp here, and kind of slowly, and then it kind of goes into this part that I'm not gonna analyze this. So very sharp, and then again gets a bit more sharp here, and here we have very kind of two sharp-ish edges, sharp-ish, like. So you see this? You get this, right? So this is what edges are. They kind of will help you. They help your volumes look better, you know. So for example, look at here. You have a very kind of rounded form here, and here we have a very sharp transition to kind of cavity, basically a very sharp cavity. So here we'll have very sharp edge. I mean, I'm trying to find any more examples of like interesting edges here. For example, here we have the kind of ball of the mouth that kind of goes like this, and then here's a very sharp transition and kind of snaps back into here. And here we have, here we have very sharp edge. Here we have kind of a softer edge right here, as it kind of goes toward to his lips. Here we have a bit of a, this part should be a bit sharper. But for the most part, really painting and rendering is all about identifying the kind of edges that you will have. So let's have a bit of a fun example. Let's get a little fun blob. Let's get a little fun blob like this. Okay, let's not make it red. Let's make it green because I don't have green. So let's create like a little fun blob. Okay, a blob of value, and I'm gonna use a opaque watercolor brush to render. This is the one I use most of the time. So the first thing I kind of just do is I just kind of, so first is because this is not like we don't have a drawing. I'm just gonna find where like these kind of planes, how these planes will go into each other, how these planes look. So for example, maybe we'll have a bit of a shadow shape here. Maybe we'll have a bit of a shadow shape here. Maybe we'll have a bit of a shadow. So a light is kind of coming from this direction. So we kind of maybe we'll have shadows like here. Here, and right now what I'm just doing is kind of like establishing where the shadows will even be. So this is kind of like a rounded character. You can think of like kind of big, like this. There you go. That's the thing where we're going to be rendering, right? So we also have to. I'm also gonna put in a light shape. Just gonna make this a bit brighter, a bit towards yellow. Just have a bit of a brighter shape for like some areas. And again, I'm just kind of putting value on this where I think it should be. I'm not being too careful about this, and this is good enough. So right now you want to start rendering. So again, we think of how. Let's look at this. Let's look at this back. So it's a pretty wide back. So when it comes to rendering, we just kind of take a kind of a big brush and we just kind of do this. Go over this and occasionally sample back the value to bring back some of that value back. Take a bit of this darker value and put it back here. And we're just doing this until we get something that looks, you know, relatively okay. And to me, this looks fine. That's fine. That's good enough for now. Maybe here at the bottom, I want to bring a bit more of this value here to kind of give it more of a, yeah, like this, more like this, right? So this arm right here, whatever this kind of arm, I call this the arm, whatever this part of the shape. Maybe I want to have something like, maybe I want it to get kind of sharp here. So it's kind of like protruding. So I just kind of render this out like this. And I kind of do a similar thing here, but I don't want to make it as rounded as this area. I just kind of want to render this a bit like this, and there's probably a bit of a drop shadow here. And drop shadows typically create very sharp edges. And now this is kind of getting lost. We kind of don't know what's happening here. So I'm gonna take another value, darker value, and create some ambient occlusion right here. So it kind of so you can kind of easily separate these two objects, so we kind of see better what's happening here. And now we can again play around with this. I'll maybe put a bit of ambient occlusion like here. But yeah, just kind of to kind of help us figure this out. Now this light, I'm gonna again do this similar thing right here. Just taking this and putting it everywhere. Now I want to actually here. I actually want to create a bit of a bump, so it kind of looks like a bump here, and that will get kind of here. And that looks okay. This looks okay to me. I don't know. Take this slide, render this a bit into the back. Push this into the back a bit. And then let's do this little blob here. and do the same thing here. This I actually don't like this light shape here. I don't think it needs it. I'm just gonna do something like this. I'm going to bring a bit of ambient occlusion here, because I don't know, I'm thinking like this is like a just adding a bit of ambient occlusion wherever I see, what I think it would be kind of cool to just kind of separate the forms a bit. That's kind of how I use it. For example, here, I actually maybe want to do something like this. Here, this part, I want to take a bit this back. So let's take this, put this here, take this, put this here. Let me cut this a bit so it's and this part I'm probably gonna have a bit of light here. No. So there you go. That's basically how you do this. Now you can probably spend probably a bit more time to get really these edges really rendered out. But again, my kind of thought process is always, what kind of transition is this? Like I always kind of think of it in terms of forms. Like, how does this look like? How does this look like? How does this look like? You know, what is the topology of this, you know, object? That's kind of how I'm always thinking about. I'm doing a bit of, I don't know what this would be, topographical lines. I don't know. Yeah, I'm just kind of thinking. I'm always thinking about how do these objects, for example, here maybe there'll be a bit more shadow here. You know, I'm just kind of thinking always about the form that I'm painting, right? And just kind of thinking, okay, what kind of transition would happen here? What kind of transition would happen here? There's a child screaming outside right now. That's fine. I'm gonna close the window. Okay. You know, this is essentially what I'm thinking whenever I'm rendering. And this is the same principle that I did this with. This is the same principle I used to make this for this. You know, it's just, is anything interesting here that I might show? It's bad, but it's the same principle. I did it for this. I just kind of pushed and pulled value, just kind of assumed where kind of edges would be, you know, and just kind of pulled and pushed value. That's really it. That's how you render, basically. So if you have the correct values, it's just very easy to do this. It just takes time, and that's really the take on this. I did this today when I was drinking coffee, and so it can be meditative. I really think I think kind of rendering by itself is can be kind of boring, but and it can take a long time. Honestly, you need to know when to stop. For example, to me, this is good enough. Yes, you can spend a couple, you know, some more time rendering out these, like, whatever these ribs are, but really you don't have to. Rendering is all about getting it to for example, this is to me done. Like, I don't feel like I need to add more to this. I think the idea is here. It's fine, right? But if it's for professional work, okay, well, maybe then I probably have to render more. But, you know, this is basically how you do it. So to resume, to have a kind of a bit of a, get everything together, the important parts are, first is the edges, which are sharp, determining edges, which are sharp, soft, and lost. And that's basically it. That's basically how you render. And if your values, this is why I say if your values are correct, this should be easy.